I loved the circus when I was a kid. I absolutely loved it. The spectacle, the big tent, the popcorn and animals, all the balloons I'd get to keep. It was all so exciting. I was an only child and a pretty lonely kid, so I guess my parents wanted to take special trips with me every year to give me some good experiences. The circus was one of them. I know as an adult that most circuses treated their animals horribly and aren't quite as glamorous as I remember them, but when I was little, none of that really crossed my mind. I still have the big Scooby-Doo balloon from the first time I ever went in my closet. I don't know why they were selling Scooby-Doo and alien balloons in particular, but I won't question it. I didn't mind the clowns either. They weren't exactly my favorite, but I would still laugh when they did their flips or chased each other around the ring after one got pied, sprayed with the water flower gun. Sometimes they would come to the front row and wave at us little kids. We usually sat higher in the stands though, so we could get a better view. I also remember having this little booklet with pictures of the clowns and all their stage names that they would autograph after the show. I particularly remember one called Mr. Turkey Lips, one with yellow straw hair and these bulging painted lips that overtook his entire face when he smiled. He was nice, polite, and pretty hilarious. He was the one to help me get over my initial fear of clowns in the first place. There was one clown, though, that completely turned my view of the circus upside down, and that would be the last time I would ever go. For the first couple of hours, this trip was completely normal. We pulled up to the big top, got a jumbo popcorn, a couple of pretzels, and grabbed our seats. This time, however, most of the back rows were already taken up, so we had to find a spot in the very front row. I sat between my mom and dad as they pointed out the trapeze and animal acts, as usual. It was amazing seeing them all up close like this, but it also made me have to really crane my neck in order to see the tightrope act. When the clowns came out, they pranced about into the ring with water guns shaped like flowers and mimed fighting with one another. One ducked as another fired, resulting in the front row turning into a splash zone. I laughed while my mom groaned and waited for the show to continue. I noticed one clown standing off to the side, though, that looked a bit different than the others. Instead of a bright and professional-looking outfit, his costume was somewhat disheveled, ill-fitting and dirty, as if he'd been rolling around outside in the mud. I also thought it was kinda weird he was just kinda standing there, not really doing anything entertaining. Being a little kid at the time, though, I figured it was all part of the show, and he'd do something silly with the other clowns in just a minute. Maybe he was just waiting for his turn or something. That's when he turned around and saw me looking at him. He continued to stand and stare at me until another clown ushered him away to make space for the next act. He glanced at me before heading by the stands in the direction of the bathrooms. By the time the animals were let in, I'd forgotten all about that strange clown who'd stared at me. That is, until I had to use the bathroom myself. My parents were the kind that once I got to a certain age, they trusted me to at least be able to find the bathroom and my way back to them on my own. I went off behind the stands and outside, where the small restroom building sat at the edge of the grassy parking lot. The air was cool, and the grass, being wet from the recent rainfall, squished underneath my sneakers with each step. There was no one else outside, so it was eerily quiet, which made me hurry to the light of the bathrooms even faster. I opened the door for the men's side and hurried in. I was half hoping there would be at least one other person in there to ease this feeling of isolation. On the other hand, though, I was very shy, so I was glad on some level to have it all to myself. Or so I thought. While in the stall, I kept hearing this ominous creaking. At first, I thought it was the wind or someone coming in. It definitely didn't help with my anxiety. The bathroom was completely quiet, save for this singular creaking sound. That's when I realized, though, that it was coming from a nearby stall. "Hello?" I called out. It was stupid, I know. but maybe someone was stuck in a stall or something and too embarrassed to say anything. There was no answer, just more creaking. Maybe one of the stall doors was broken. I finished up and went to wash my hands. The sinks were framed by a gigantic mirror that hadn't been cleaned in a while. A thin layer of dust obscured my face as I washed my hands and wondered what act might be on now. Suddenly, the stall door next to mine came crashing open, and the clown from earlier rushed up behind me. He grabbed my hand and forced it behind my back. He forced my stomach into the sink so I couldn't move. His makeup was smeared, and he ditched the bodysuit, wearing only a ripped t-shirt and jeans. I could smell the sweat coming off him, as if he hadn't showered for days on end. I felt sick. I wanted to scream. Something sharp pressed into my back. I didn't know what it was. The man whispered in my ear, "Scream and I'll gutcha. Now, you want to kiss the clown, boy?" His voice was deep, and I could smell something bitter on his breath. He looked to be in his mid-40s, maybe older. Now that I think about it, he was also clearly drunk. "No! Let me go!" "No one's coming for you. Get going." He started trying to shove me out the door. I clung onto that sink for dear life, to the point where my knuckles turned white and my fingers hurt. I was begging, crying for him to let me go, for my mom, my dad, for anyone. That's when Turkey Lips in full clown garb burst into the men's room. He took one look at me, at the man who was presumably holding a knife in his hand, and he sprang into action. He dashed at the man, repeatedly striking him in the face until his grip slipped just enough that I could get away. I ran with tears streaming down my face and fogging up my glasses. I thought my lungs would burst. I ran into the big top screaming as I found my mom and dad. They were shocked, confused, and scared because I'd never acted this way before. They took me outside when I pointed to the bathroom. I frantically explained everything along the way. The clown, the man, and most importantly, Mr. Turkey Lips coming to my rescue. We found him lying on the floor, blood trickling out of his nose and a gash in his stomach. The man who tried to kidnap me was gone. We called 911 immediately and waited with Turkey Lips until the ambulance arrived. My dad took me outside so I wouldn't have to see all the blood any more than I had already, while my mom tended to him. She was an ER nurse, so she knew how to relatively stop the bleeding on the fly using paper towels. It was not the cleanest method, but when you had a man bleeding to death in the circus bathroom, you had to make do with whatever you could. The ambulance showed up not long after, as well as the police. They took him away on a gurney and questioned me and my parents separately. I told the officers how he'd helped me, and about what the kidnapper had looked like both in and out of costume. I remember throughout the entire ordeal, the peppy circus music was playing out of the speakers like nothing had happened at all. My parents took me home and made me sleep in their room that night, in between the two of them. I think they were afraid of leaving me alone, like I might disappear if they weren't looking, none the wiser. They also wouldn't let me go to the public restroom again for a long time, circus or not. It was a little bit embarrassing, but I understood. I didn't really want to go alone either. We also stopped going to the circus after that. I was a bit sad that one of my favorite childhood places had been tainted by such a bad experience, but with the way I felt even seeing ads for it on TV or in the paper, I got over the sadness pretty quickly. Thankfully, I learned later that Mr. Turkey Lips, I never learned his real name, made a full recovery. Apparently, he was on break and going to the restroom when he heard me screaming. After I ran out, he wrestled with the man and ended up getting slashed twice and stabbed once in the stomach. He said he didn't regret getting injured to help me though, and I'll forever be grateful for that. Had he gone straight to his car like usual for his break, or decided not to get involved, I wouldn't be here today. I learned from my parents that apparently the man who tried to abduct me didn't work for the circus at all. He'd somehow stolen a clown costume and slipped in unnoticed by everyone. That's why he'd just been standing there. He didn't know the choreography, nor did he have the right props to really blend in. Maybe when he zeroed in on me, he went to the bathroom hoping I would use it during the night. and unfortunately I did. I don't know what he had planned for me, but I thank God I never had to find out. Stay safe out there, and remember, if something looks out of place, don't just ignore it. I came home from a date at around 11 p.m. or so. The house was completely dark, but I didn't switch on the lights at the moment because I knew my way around well enough. When I emerged out of the bathroom on my way back to the bedroom down the hall, I bumped into my dog. He's pretty big, about mid-thigh or so. I told my dog that I loved him and that he needed to get back to sleep with me. I opened my bedroom door and switched on the light at the same time. To my surprise, though, I saw my dog already laying on my bed, lifting his head up in confusion when the light came on to look at me. I wondered what I'd just bumped into in the hallway. I had a favorite pair of silver hoop earrings that I like to wear pretty much all the time. One day, I decided to look for them, and I couldn't find them anywhere. No big deal. I'm kind of disorganized anyway. I figured I just left them lying around somewhere. I kept my eyes open for the next day or two, figuring I'd eventually stumble across them, but there was no such luck. They had been missing for several days, and I had a date planned for later that evening. I really wanted to find them, so I really thoroughly looked everywhere I could think of. Behind the furniture, under the couch, everywhere. I especially looked in and around my bedroom, as I had a tendency to climb into my bed with them on and feel them poking and pulling when my head would hit the pillow. My usual habit was to sleepily pluck them out and toss them on the nightstand, but sometimes I would miss. I looked everywhere, behind the nightstand, under the bed, in the sheets, under the pillows, no luck. Bummed out, I gave up a couple of hours later. I went and got ready for my date. Just as I was about to leave, though, I glanced over at my bed, only to find them sitting there in plain sight on top of my pillow. I was home alone at that time and hadn't left the house in between looking for the earrings and getting ready for my date. There's no way I could have missed them. I can't for the life of me figure out how these things were happening to me. It's so strange. I was hiking through the remnants of a long abandoned remote town. In the surrounding area, to get as far into the woods as I was, you had to cross fallen trees over a creek 3 times. I had just crossed over the 3rd bridge and was about 5 miles in or so when something blue caught my eye just ahead of me. There was a man about in his 60s or so, wearing blue satin pajamas, sitting in a tree. The closer I got to him, the more and more he began to laugh. It wasn't like a maniacal laugh, but it did set off alarm bells in my head nevertheless. He wasn't wearing any shoes and looked well-groomed and clean. I gave him a friendly wave as I passed him by. He just kept laughing. As I'd gone on a bit further, it stopped. I turned around to check, and he was already gone. There had been no branch cracking, no plants rustling, nothing. It's like he'd just disappeared. It rubbed me the wrong way. The area I was in was a pretty rough hike already. It was very secluded, and not many people ventured as deep as I was that day. I have no idea what that man was doing there, but it sure was a freaky sight to see. I worked in the graveyard shift doing security at a facility that had a couple of large warehouses on it. It was Christmas Day, so there were not many other people on the property at all, which was going to mean a super easy night for me. As I was roving around doing my patrols, though, I noticed one of the bay doors was open in one of the warehouses. It was odd for any of them to be left open at all, so I decided to check out what was going on. I walked over to the bay door and walked inside. One thing I must point out now is that in an effort to save money on utilities, All the lights in the warehouse are motion activated and turn on as you walk underneath them. After you're out of range of the sensor, the lights immediately shut off. That means the lights are never on unless someone is moving directly underneath them. As I peered into the warehouses, I looked down one of the aisles of shelves and saw a light on in the distance, approximately 300 yards away. As I watched, the next one turned on, and then the next. The lights were coming toward me, as if there were someone moving in my direction. Yet I could see absolutely nothing in the aisles. After watching the lights move all around the facility for a few moments, I got weirded out and left. I never figured out why it happened, but it creeps me out whenever I think about it. When I was in college, I took a part-time job stocking shelves at Kohl's. We would arrive at 2 a.m. and work until 7 in the morning. Each morning, we'd have 5 people arrive like clockwork. We would all walk in through the same door and take the far left aisle to get to the back of the store, where the employee lounge was located. On this morning, though, I took the middle aisle because I wanted to bypass the lounge and go straight to the inventory room to load up my cart. Department stores are really creepy when they're not open yet, especially with 90% of the lights turned off. The floor sometimes has mannequins half-dressed and in the aisles because they're constantly shifting product around after closing up the day before. On this morning, I walked down the center aisle and noticed this man walking from the back of the store to the front. He looked to be an older man, wearing business clothes of some sort. Obviously, I thought this was out of place, but sometimes the regional manager would show up. It was very early, and this guy was very tall. As we approached one another, I couldn't get a good enough view of his face to really tell. He seemed to be wearing these really thick eyeglasses that cast a shadow over his mouth and chin, blocking any chance of making eye contact. Because of this, it was really awkward when we got within 10 feet of each other. I just looked down and said good morning, giving a quick look. I couldn't really see his face still, so I just looked back down. He gave me a cheerful good morning response as I continued to the back. The man continued on to the front, and I went into the inventory room. I began unboxing items and placing them on the cart. The manager of the morning team came back and started giving me instructions for the Christmas items. She was the sort of person that was very charismatic and always happy. After she finished, I asked her who that corporate guy from earlier I saw that morning was. She gave me a weird look and said nobody was expected to be there. She asked me for a description, and I shared it with her. At first, she thought it could be the new regional marketing guy, but we realized that couldn't be it, because he didn't have the keys to get inside yet, and they never come at 2 o'clock in the morning anyway. She darted off to the neighboring admin office to find out if anyone was expected, and I went back to work. 20 minutes later, she came back, saying that indeed nobody was expected to be there. The security system showed no entry since closing that night before. She asked me if I was messing around, or if I'd been drinking or something. I told her to check the cameras because I'd definitely seen someone. She asked if I would go with her to check the camera feed. I agreed and we walked to the room. She was joking around, saying, "Let's go see if we can find your new imaginary friend here." She pulled up the interface for the cameras and set the dial to the hour we arrived. It started to play the first camera angle. At first, we saw nothing. I couldn't remember exactly where I'd crossed paths with the man. She asked me if this really was the area. My mind was blown. I really started to question my sanity. There's no way he was not in the camera feed. She pulled up the next angle, though, and this time, we saw a shadowy figure moving around in the back next to the walls. They were quickly scrambling around, weaving in between the clothes racks with the clothes moving on their own hangers. They ran through the women's section. I went from questioning my sanity to being completely freaked out. We both got the chills. She stood up to turn the lights on in the room that we were in, and we both looked in disbelief. After viewing it again, she decided to look from all angles to make sure this really happened. She clicked the next camera pointed in that direction. As it started to play, we saw the dark shape more resemble a person this time. Clearly, this person was moving about on all fours though, low to the ground like something you'd see in an Exorcist movie. At this point, the manager picked up the phone to call 911. While she was on the phone with them, she clicked the next camera angle, which gave us the overhead 360-degree view. I get goosebumps thinking about this. You could see the man in his clothes, but I could finally see his face, which is what made our jaws drop. In surprise, she hung up the phone. I screamed at her for hanging it up, and she picked it up again to dial 911. To this day, I still really can't explain it. It was almost like the man had no mouth or something wrong with his face. He had those glasses on, and no lights were able to get through them to see his eyes. It made it difficult to confirm what he really looked like. We played the next camera at the exact same time. We arrived to the point showing him going toward the front of the building. As we watched though, we never saw him leave. As we looked at further camera angles from right now, we confirmed there was someone in the back moving to the front of the building again. As they moved past the dressing room, there was a gap in the midsection between the cameras that couldn't be found. She asked me to get on the overhead speaker and ask everyone to come to the lounge. I did so, and heard her telling the police we had an intruder or a possible squatter and didn't feel safe. She asked that they hurry. She got on the intercom and told everybody to come once again, but stated it was for a quick meeting. She switched the screens on the live camera feed to focus on the front entrance, seeing if anyone would show up or leave. I started to hear everyone coming to the lounge. We received notification from the 911 operator that 2 officers had arrived and asked that we open the door. Thank goodness, the patrolmen were sitting in the parking lot right next to the door. We asked that they come into the building because we felt the intruder might still be hiding in the middle area. We continued to look through the different camera angles until we heard banging on the door next to us. We jumped up in surprise but disarmed the locks. The 2 officers walked in, and we told them more details. They asked for one person to speak at a time and to slow down. After explaining that we believed the person was still there once again, they started to be more alert. One cop said he would stay with us, and the other volunteered to walk around the floor. As I showed the cop what we'd seen on the video earlier, he was disturbed by what he was seeing. These were obviously not normal moving patterns. He grabbed the radio on his shoulder and requested assistance. He specifically requested 5 of the closest patrolmen in the area. He asked if the brightness could be increased. She brightened it, but it didn't really help. Then came the distorted face scene. He was quite surprised that this really creepy guy went from a demon running on all fours to a casual guy from a distance earlier. He claimed he had never seen anything this bizarre, and definitely felt the man was still in the building. Within 5 minutes, the other patrolmen started to show up, and they did a search of the store area. We all stayed in the back watching the cops. Nobody was found, and no video showed the man leaving. They got their paperwork and started interviewing us during this time. We viewed all the different angles and in fast-forward mode to see if we could find him again. We did find one strange instance where a coat fell from the hanger onto the ground, but nothing was near it, so no videos of anyone were found. Except for the crew that had closed the night before, the entry log showed no intrusion or access request was made. In the end, they had no idea who the man was or what happened to him. A report was filed, and the video was taken by the cops. They went to the neighboring stores and looked through their video feeds too, but found nothing. We opened at the usual time later that day, and nothing else unusual happened. When I first started working with the medical examiner, I was asked to come in and prepare the autopsy one day. We would typically do our autopsies early in the morning due to the pathologist's schedule, which meant I had to go in very early to prepare the body. So here's me, a kid fresh out of college, in the morgue, during the dark of night at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I was surrounded by dead bodies, thinking to myself this was how every horror movie started. The body I was preparing for autopsy this time was that of a larger person, and I had to move the body from the gurney and body bag onto the autopsy table by myself. I was still pretty new, so I struggled for quite a while. As I was pushing the deceased torso up onto the table, I heard a low wheezing sound escape his lips. If I hadn't studied anatomy and physiology so closely, I would have dropped that body, potentially ruining the autopsy, and pissed myself while running out of the morgue. As it stands, I was pretty freaked out. I tried to remember, though, that some air does get into your lungs and stay after you pass away. Pushing on the body, I seemed to have forced some of it out of his trachea, and this caused the dead body to moan like a ghost. It really surprised me while I was trying to move it around while alone in the morgue, with a fridge full of dead people at 3 o'clock in the morning. A literal graveyard shift. Luckily for me, though, it was a totally explainable phenomenon, and not a zombie outbreak or something. I worked the night shift at an Amazon warehouse. On slow nights, management would send people home. On this particular night, though, I was stuck working on a very slow night, with only 2 other employees in this enormous warehouse. You could hardly see anyone else amongst the 5 floors and hundreds of racks on a normal day, let alone during a shift like this. During that shift, though, I started to catch glimpses of someone wearing red, turning the corners as I did. I saw them numerous times. I waited until lunch and checked out what my other coworkers for the shift were wearing, and neither of them were wearing red. One night at around 1 a.m. or so, I was dead asleep with my boyfriend next to me. All of a sudden, I heard someone in my house shouting and asking if anyone was home. I woke up my ex and told him to go see what the hell was going on. We both got out of bed. I couldn't find my glasses, but the man was still shouting. I came out of my bedroom in my pajamas and saw there was a big bald man in what looked to be a police uniform standing in the entryway to my house. I was squinting, trying to get a better look at him, when he looked me in the eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am, I just wanted to tell you that your door was left unlocked. You should lock it from now on." I mumbled something to the effect of, "Oh, okay." He left immediately after. I was still as blind as a bat, but I could see that he walked away instead of getting into a car. No policeman would be policing a woodsy area like the one I live in on foot. The next day, I called the local police station and asked if any officers had reported this incident. They said they would check with the on-duty officers and get back to me. They called me the next day and said they'd checked with every single one of them. No one had done this. I still get freaked out whenever I think about this happening, and I wish I knew what this guy was up to and why he just left like that in the end. The creepiest thing that ever happened to me would have to be when my old neighborhood served as the setting for gang warfare. Now, this neighborhood was fairly nice and mostly a middle-class suburb. I was in elementary school back then and lived with my brother and mom. At 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up to a loud popping sound. Surprised, I ran into the hallway to see my mom and brother standing there as well. We heard several more of these sounds and slowly went to see what they were. The living room was located right next to the front door and had a huge window overseeing the front lawn. When another pop was heard, it followed by a bright flash from the window. My mom yelled at me to get down, so I did so. We crouched together under the window for about 3 minutes on end. At the end, there was a loud screech of tires, followed by even more cracks in the night. Then there was silence. After a few more minutes of waiting, my mom slowly opened the door and peered outside. When she gave us an okay, we also went out with her. All of our neighbors were outside, looking around to see what had actually happened. In the morning, local news trucks came by to cover the event. Apparently, 2 Asian American gangs met at the local park to make a drug deal. When things went awry, one of the gangs chased the other throughout the neighborhood. One of the gang members was even shot dead right on our very block. In 1997, I was 17 years old. I was driving my girlfriend at the time home late one night. We were sitting at a stoplight at an overpass above a freeway. All of a sudden, an 80s Dodge Omni comes flying up to the light across from us and barely even stops at all. They blasted through while the light was still red. I looked across at the driver in disbelief, only to see he looked extremely panicked. That's when I looked over to the passenger's side, and shit immediately got real. I noticed there was a girl with duct tape wrapped around her face and shoulders. Her hair was disheveled, and she was crying. It took me a few seconds to even process what I was seeing. I looked over at my girlfriend, and she looked back at me. What the hell is going on in that car? No sooner than I turned to look back, the guy had already turned the wrong way onto a one-way street. I freaked out. I threw my car in reverse and tried backtracking. I flew down city streets to keep sight of him. At one point in time, we even saw him hit a curb and turn around onto 8 Mile. He didn't have plates on his car. I didn't know what else I could do though. I hurried up home and rushed in. I called the cops right away, while my girlfriend frantically tried telling my mom what we'd seen. The cops came and took our story. There was never a missing persons story that matched what we'd said about that night, so my mom never quite believed us. It was all just written off as 2 teens with overactive imaginations. I know what I saw that night though. I'm a man in my 30s now, and I'll never forget the look on that girl's face. The crazy look in that guy's eyes as he drove away. My girlfriend, who later became my wife, remembers it vividly as well. It was one of the craziest nights of both of our lives. I went outside one early morning and saw this woman kneeling in my mother's flower garden. I was a little creeped out. I was about 10 years old, and suddenly a person I didn't know was just sitting there in the middle of our garden. Not knowing what else to do, I waved hello to her. She turned around and immediately apologized for being in our yard. She said that we had such nice flowers, she just couldn't help it. Then she just walked away. I didn't really think that much of it. I went about my day as usual. My mom and dad left to do errands eventually though, so my brother and I were home alone. We were both watching TV when, without any warning at all, someone tapped on my shoulder from behind me. I turned around and saw the woman was standing right there. She apologized and asked me where my mom and dad were. I told her they would be coming back at any time, but that she really shouldn't be inside our house. Strangely enough, she asked for a pen and a piece of paper, saying she wanted to write them a little note. I complied and told her to do it out in the dining room. I watched from behind a corner in a hallway and never let her out of my sight. I was beyond afraid in this moment. She calmly set the pen down though, then walked out the front door like nothing ever happened. I bolted to the window and made sure she'd actually left. Then I went to the door and locked it up. I nervously and very slowly approached the note she'd left on the table and read it to myself. I was dumbfounded by what it said. She said she believed God had spoken to her in the garden and told her to build an altar for her grandmother. The note was her scheduling an appointment with my mother to discuss placing a tombstone and a prayer table in the garden. My parents got home soon after, and I told them what happened. She'd left her phone number on the note. My mom took the day off and sat out on the porch. At the time, the woman said she waited for her to arrive, but the woman never showed up. My mom called the number on the note too, only to get a disconnected message. The only proof I had that any of these things had actually happened was the note she'd left for my mom and dad. They don't believe most of the story. It seems like my brother even forgot about it too, but I know it really happened. This random crazy woman somehow got into our house in the middle of the day and just gently tapped on my shoulder and left a note. I'm an extremely outdoorsy female. I love to spend a lot of time in nature. I spent the better part of my early 20s living in the remote northern locations and exploring a lot of Alaska, Yukon, and BC. I have many odd, frightening, and bizarre stories that came from my times in the north, and this is one of them. In the summer of 2012, when I was 22 years old, I was living and working in a pretty remote town in northern British Columbia. I worked from May to September. The place I worked at was a campground in a provincial park on the Alaskan Highway, 4 hours north of Fort Nelson and 2 hours south of the Yukon/British Columbia border. The best part about this park was the fact it had a beautiful natural hot spring, which attracted tourists from all over North America. They came every summer. I lived in an old trailer on a separate part of the campground where the rest of the staff lived. I quickly got used to living in a place that had no running water, no electricity, no cell phone service, no internet, and driving for hours to Fort Nelson every 2 weeks to get groceries. Laundry wasn't exactly easy either. Life was pretty sweet though. I got to hike, go for late-night dips in the springs, and make some traveling friends. I also got to spend a lot of quality time in nature, getting to know the flora and fauna of the landscape. My job at the campground park was facility operator, which was general maintenance and cleaning of the campsites, as well as the gatehouse. Sometimes I also had a few security shifts here and there. The feeling of living in the woods was completely different than the feeling of living in a city. As far as safety goes in the city that I'm from, there are people all around you and you're aware of the fact that your house or apartment could get broken into, but emergency services are pretty quick to respond, and neighbors are a big plus. In the woods, you feel much more vulnerable. The nearest police are 4 hours away, and I lived in a trailer that was run down enough that anyone could break into it, not to mention it was really dark, which made it all the more easy to sneak around at night. I was already on edge sleeping every night in a trailer. The one next to mine was abandoned by the previous manager of the campground after his son had shot himself in the head inside of it. The previous manager had promised numerous times that he would hire a company to drive up from Fort Nelson and tow that abandoned trailer away, but that never happened. Not whilst I lived there, at least. Nobody seemed to care about it too much, though. I went into the trailer once and saw that blood and brains were still on the wall from way back then, and never went back in. Back in the 90s, there had also been a fatal bear attack at the hot springs. We all had to read the incredibly gruesome and detailed police report for our training. So yeah, it was an unsettling atmosphere to say the least. One night, probably at around 2 in the morning, I was asleep inside my trailer when I was woken to a very loud banging on the trailer door. Reasonably shaken, I looked outside the window next to my bed, only to see a car with its lights on and 2 men I'd never seen before standing at my door. I could feel the blood drain from my face. This was the moment I'd been scared of for all this time. Through the door, I called out, "Excuse me? How can I help you?" One of the guys, clearly hammered out of his mind, started rambling on about something. No matter how hard I tried, though, I couldn't understand what he was saying. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't understand what you're trying to tell me." The other guy starts frantically trying to explain something in the same drunken state as the first guy. I decided at this point that they probably didn't mean any harm. I opened the door to speak to them. They looked visibly shaken, and I could tell they were pretty desperate for help. They didn't have the mental capacity of a sober person, though, so they couldn't coherently tell me what was wrong. One of the men started telling me a very long-winded story, and somehow I managed to piece things together through all of his slurring and hiccuping. Basically, he and his friends were on vacation. They came up from Fort Nelson to party and had a really long drive. They were at the hot spring drinking beers, which they were very sorry about doing without permission. They were very drunk when someone started running around the camp randomly stabbing people. I looked at the guy telling me the story and noticed he had blood all over his clothing. I repeated what he said. "You're telling me someone is out there right now going around stabbing everybody?" He replied, "Yes. Someone was running around stabbing everyone." The other guy yelled, "Come on, let's go!" They hopped into their car and sped off. I didn't even get the chance to. Furthermore, now I was standing at my trailer door in the darkness alone, thinking there was a maniac running around outside wielding a knife. I had no phone. The only person I knew who had a communication device was the ranger, and his cabin was a 5-minute walk away from my trailer. I remembered at that point that I did have some type of radio, though. I ran inside my trailer and locked the door. I tried to get the ranger on the radio. Of course, his radio was switched off. The only thing I could think to do at this point was go to the ranger's cabin myself and notify him of this emergency situation. I slipped out of my trailer and ran through the darkness, across the maintenance ground, past the creepy suicide trailer. I ran towards the ranger's cabin, and every single noise I heard from the surrounding forest was making my heart pound faster and faster. I kept imagining this maniacal man sneaking through the bushes, entering people's tents and killing everyone like some bad horror film. I got to the ranger's cabin and pounded on his door. He answered within just a few moments, visibly sleep-deprived. I told him the whole story. Whilst I was still there, he called the police and told me they were on their way. They would take about 4 hours to get there. He grabbed his gun and walked me back to the trailer. He told me to not let anybody in. I stayed up the rest of the night listening for any sort of disturbance around me. The intense kind of listening where you're concentrating so hard on the external sounds that might be made that you almost feel like you don't hear anything at all. After about 2 hours of doing this, my trailer started rocking back and forth. I froze. My heart dropped in my chest. I could hear the sound of someone breathing extremely heavily. I was thinking this was it. That knife-wielding maniac was going to murder me, and this trailer was going to be another abandoned one, which they'd have to tow away some years later. I'm just sitting there on my bed in the trailer as it's rocking back and forth, waiting for this maniac to stop tormenting me and just break the window and end me. I'm listening to this heavy breathing, and that's when I hear a grunt, a very non-human sounding grunt. I got a feeling this was not what I thought it was. I peered out the window and saw a bison was scratching its back on the side of my trailer, causing it to rock back and forth. The RCMP got there around 6:30 a.m. and proceeded with their investigation. For about 10 hours, they closed off the springs, and the entire campground turned into an episode of CSI. I didn't hear anything about what took place during the night until the investigation was over. Apparently, there was a guy at the springs who made a lewd comment about one of the females in another group, which resulted in an argument. The guy disappeared and returned an hour later with a knife. He stabbed 2 of the guys in the group and booked it away. Not before stopping at my trailer with his buddy to tell me of the incident, though. Yeah, one of the guys at my trailer was the guy going around stabbing people. My guess is that he and his friends stopped by my trailer to try and make it look like they were innocent. It was their drunken logic. The two men that were stabbed survived, which is very good. For many days following this incident, I was cleaning up blood-soaked clothing and rags from all over random places in the campground. Let me preface this by saying I'm just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. I don't believe in paranormal, ghosts, demons, or aliens, or whatever else. I did have an event happen to me this Halloween though, that I have to admit kinda has me scratching my head ever since then. So, we'd been having a slow trick-or-treating night in our neighborhood. That was pretty odd in and of itself. We usually have kids from all different areas dropping off in ours and constantly parading around our door. That night, I'd say we had no more than 8 to 10 groups of kids though. It was around 9:30 or so, and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on supposedly true events. Like I said, I kinda scoff at that kinda stuff. I do like a good ghost story every now and then though, and I was in the Halloween mood. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour or so, and it was getting quite late now. We decided to turn the porch light on and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog. We only put her in the crate because we were afraid she'd try and get out and play with all the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase her down every time down the street. I also didn't want her scaring or intimidating anyone away because she can be a little bit scary when she's excited. I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch. She laid down on my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. or so when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going upstairs to take a shower and get ready for bed. After all, it was a Thursday, and he still had to get up early for the next day. Our teenage son was out with his friends at the local haunted house and wasn't expected back for another hour or so. That left me all alone on the couch with Chloe. Just because I don't believe doesn't mean that those shows don't freak me out though, and being alone now, I have to say I was kind of on edge watching the shows. It wasn't long until I heard the upstairs shower turn on. All of a sudden, the light came on in the patio. My initial reaction was, what the hell? Really? It's almost 10 p.m. Soon though, an uneasy feeling came over me. Why was nobody ringing our doorbell? It glows in the dark, and without the porch light on, it should have been extra obvious to everyone there. I paused. I couldn't really ignore it. Our door had a big glass panel, and everyone right by the door could easily see inside and know I was just sitting there watching TV. It would have been rude for me to not answer whoever was there. Just before I got up though, there was a knocking sound from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, only to find she was already gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there as she normally did. Instead though, I looked around the room and found her crouching by the back door like she wanted to go out. I have to say this strange behavior heightened my anxiety. "Chloe, crate," I said. She just turned back to look at me like I was crazy though. I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. That was about the time a car drove by our street and cast enough light on the door for me to see the silhouettes of two small people through the glass. I instantly felt relieved as it was just some kids. Probably a couple from my neighborhood even, on their way back home after a long night of trick-or-treating. Maybe wanting a bit extra or something. I headed for the door and marched back to make sure Chloe wasn't following me. I turned the porch light on. When I got to the door, sure enough, I could see through the glass what appeared to be a couple of pretty small kids. Out late for such young ones, I thought. I began to wonder what kind of parents would let their kids run around the streets this late at night alone. I opened the door just enough to see who was outside. What struck me as immediately odd was that these kids were not wearing any costumes. They were just wearing normal street clothes. There was no customary trick-or-treat either. I began to feel a bit uneasy. It was one girl and one boy. The girl on my left was older, I'd say around 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde but couldn't make out any distinct features, as our lights come from high above and on the columns at the front porch, so most of the light was coming in from behind them. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter, I'd say between 8 or 9. The girl very politely spoke up. "Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mother?" As she spoke, though, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me that something was wrong. What kind of kid that age didn't have a phone of their own these days? I couldn't even remember the last time I had someone ask me to use my home phone. "Huh? Don't you have a phone of your own that you can call your mom on?" I asked. This is when things got really weird. They both turned to look at one another, as if they were supposed to say something, but neither of them spoke. They both turned back to me at once, and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared." I have to admit there were two competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart wanting to help these two small children. But there was that sinking fear in my gut that was keeping that feeling at bay. It was then that I noticed during the short conversation, the door had already opened a few extra inches. I was completely unaware of having done so myself. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I'll call her myself?" There was another pause, and they again looked at each other. After a short moment, they turned back to me. "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mother?" With that last statement, the little girl moved closer to the door, almost as if she was just going to walk inside. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. She had these solid black eyes. That's all I could see. The motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror. I don't think I've ever felt that before in my entire life. I could feel every hair on my arm and the back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where my face was just able to stick out a little bit. The girl again pleaded, "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and fake cry. I shut the door and locked it. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," I shouted through the door. "But I'm not letting you into my house." I could still see them standing there on the porch, just staring at me through the glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more, to know they were not there. After what seemed like forever, probably only a few seconds, I decided to call my neighbor who lived across the street. As I made my way to the side table by our couch to get my phone, though, I glanced back to the door. I got my phone and started to look for his contact info. That was when the kids stepped away and began walking off into the street. As they did so, I went over to the door to get a better look at who they were, where they went too. I could see that the kids had walked out to stand under the street lamp nearest my house and were staring in at me. As I lifted my phone to my ear, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met up with my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't really believe in any paranormal stuff. I had never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think, what I have to think, is that these kids were just yanking my chain on Halloween night. But I will say this for them. They were really, really good at it, because they scared the fuck out of me and my dog, black-eyed kids or not. Thinking back about this, it still seems like something out of a horror movie and makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. So me and a girl drive her car out to a nature center at around 11 p.m. one night. The gate was never closed after business hours, so we stopped the car in a parking lot overlooking a marsh. There was a boardwalk which ran through it, and heavy brush as well. Fleetwood Mac was playing over the stereo, and we were just shooting the shit. 10 to 15 minutes after we'd parked the car, I swore I could see a flickering light far off in the brush. We both kinda shrugged it off, as we were in the middle of nowhere. Who the hell was going to be roaming around in the woods of a closed-down nature center? As you can imagine, it's pretty damn dark in a marsh at night. Once your eyes adjust, though, you can just about make out silhouettes and see things directly in front of you. That's about it, though. Fast forward to 15 more minutes later. We're making out in the driver's seat, and she's sitting next to me. Both of our seats were sort of reclined back, and I was leaning over half on top of her. After a few minutes of this, I leaned up to say something to her when I noticed a big dark object pressed up against the passenger side window. At first, it didn't quite register. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks, though. I realized there was a man with his face pressed right up against the window, watching us. I shot back a bold stare at the man, but he did not seem to move or react at all. The girl looked at me, then traced my line of sight over to the window and screamed. With that, the guy took off and ran off into the marsh. I turned the car on and put that nature center in the rearview mirror as fast as I could. My cousin and I went out drinking in Ohio. I was very drunk, so I stepped outside for some fresh air from the crowded bar. There was this guy outside who was kind of lanky and seemed to be having a smoke. Feeling disoriented, I sat down on the bench to rest my head a bit. That was when the guy came right up behind me and whispered to me, "You're never gonna make it in this world if I had it my way. I would take you home to my tool shed, tie you to the wall, and torture you to death." I responded, "Well, that sounds really lovely. Hold on, I'm really interested in that and all, but I've got to take a piss real quick, so I'll be right back." I rushed back into the bar and went to the men's restroom, where I locked the door until my head cleared up a bit. Then I came out and told my cousin we should leave right now. My neighbor is an old lady who comes outside every once in a while to chat with people who walk by her house. The first conversation that she had with my dad, she complimented the painting that he had hanging in his bedroom. No big deal. She probably saw us moving in or caught a glimpse of it at some point before we got curtains. Then though, when she met our dog, she said, "He's much scarier through the window, isn't he?" Again, no big deal. She began to comment on things like this often though, asking us why we didn't walk our dog that morning. She's just an old lady though, right? She's probably just bored and outside a lot. When she met me, she swore she'd already met me before, but I'd never seen her in my entire life. She asked me how I liked my room and told me all about the girls who'd had it before me. It was starting to get kind of weird. She rubbed me the wrong way, but I didn't really mind it much. She was fairly easy to avoid, or so I thought at least. As I was taking the dog outside one day, I happened to glance over and see her staring in at me through her window. She lowered the blinds when she saw I'd noticed her, but I could tell she was peeking through them, watching me still. Hours later, I went to the kitchen, only to see her again watching me very intently through the window. Upstairs in my parents' room, there's a window in their bathroom. I saw her again watching as I was replacing the towels in there. She just kept on watching me more and more. The more I looked for her, the more I could see she was watching our house, basically all the time, 24/7, not only from her window either. She'd sit behind her car and watch us from the street, or sit on her porch and watch our front door. She'd slowly walk down the street in front of our house and watch us at literally all hours of the day. Apparently, she'd done it to the people who lived here before us too. Everyone knew in the neighborhood to keep their blinds and curtains shut all the time, otherwise she was basically guaranteed to stalk you. I used to work overnights at a hotel and would monitor the security cameras. A little indicator would blink when motion was detected. It always gave me the creeps when I would hear the elevator ding. I'd run out to the lobby to greet the guests and make sure they didn't need something, only to see nobody getting off the elevator. I'd watch the tape sometimes and see the motion indicator blinking on a floor. Then I would see the elevator open on that floor and the motion indicator blinking on the camera down the hall. It really scared the hell out of me to see no one was there. One time I was in my office in the middle of the night even, when I began to hear what sounded like someone banging on the door with their fists, just slamming down over and over. You could even see me reacting to it in the video from the security cameras. My head whipped to face the door where the sound was coming from, then immediately whipped around to stare at the cameras to see who the hell was outside my door. There was nobody there though, and none of the motion sensors had picked up anything either. It was not fun finishing the rest of that shift that night. There were always just some weird things going on there. I was living with my godparents at the time of this event. It was around 6 p.m., and my godfather got back from work. He asked who had left all this blood near the pool in the backyard. Needless to say, I was very confused. I had been in the room right next to the pool the whole time, and I had no idea what he could possibly be talking about. We pulled up the security footage on our security system, only for it to show a man jumping the fence in broad daylight. He'd cut himself on the barbed wire and was looking for ways to get into the home through the back. I was only 10 feet away from him the entire time, and I didn't hear a single thing. It's scary to think about what could have happened if a window or the back door had been left unlocked. I would have been caught totally unawares. I used to sneak out of my house as a teenager to go spend time with my girlfriend who lived 3 miles away. I would normally ride my bike, but I decided against it this night for some reason. After I left my girlfriend's house, I had to head home. And that was when I noticed a pair of headlights coming down the road opposite me. As soon as the car passed me by, I could see the surrounding area lighting up red from their taillights. They were slowing down. The car turned down into a side road, so I didn't really think much of it. Maybe someone coming home from the bar or something. About a minute passed by though, when I see headlights coming up from behind me again. It was the very same car. As it got closer to me, it slowed down. I calmly reached for my pocket knife, just in case anything was about to happen. I wasn't ready for what I was about to see though. The car pulled up right beside me. I looked inside and could see a man dressed as a clown. He smiled at me, and it was not a friendly smile either. It was a smile that could induce nightmares. A lowered brow, showing his teeth. I could feel my legs going numb. I couldn't even look away. After about 15 seconds of driving by me at walking speed, he sped off over the hill. A veil of relief fell over me, as I thought I was now home free. No. Only moments later, the same distinct headlights came roaring back over the hill. I knew immediately it was him. I gripped my blade so hard my knuckles turned white as I prepared to defend myself. He slowed down as he approached me, but this time his smiling face was gone. He was dead-faced and serious. What I had thought was some cruel joke erupted into the realization that this clown had something sinister planned. He drove past me and turned into a side road once again. While he was turning around, I knew I had to act fast. I took off running into the woods, knowing my house was only a single mile away. I stayed hidden in the shadows, praying I wouldn't be spotted. Thankfully, it seemed I had lost him in the woods. I got home safely that night. I still wonder what would have happened, though, if I had just kept walking along the road. A long time ago, while my family was away on vacation, I was left home all alone. I got a sudden bad feeling one night, so instead I went to go stay at my friend's house down the road. While at his house, at around 2 a.m., I ended up receiving several blocked phone calls on my mobile phone. When I answered, the person on the other line didn't say anything. I could just hear them breathing, and after a few moments they hung up. A few weeks later, I decided to check my phone bills and discovered that those calls were coming from my home phone. There had been an unknown person inside my house. I never did report it, but I don't think I slept for months after that. Nothing was missing from the home, so I have no idea what their intentions could have been. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my mom was putting me to bed one night. I'd fallen asleep when suddenly I was awoken in the middle of the night. I saw a dark figure in the shape of a man standing in front of my window. I woke my mom up almost about to cry. I was hoping it was just a tree or something because we were on the second floor of the house. When she woke up though, she saw him too and told me to stay put and not move. She quickly ran to the living room where we had guests over, and everyone was still awake. She told everyone what happened, and for 3 hours everyone went out and searched around the house. What I never told her though, was that in that split second when she left the window started to rattle as if someone was trying to open it and get inside. They never did find him though. I was home alone with my sister. I was 11 and my sister was 14. We had just gotten home from school, and we were entirely new to the concept of being home alone. My younger brother had left his bike out on the stoop by our front door, as he always had a tendency to do. I was practicing my piano when I heard a sudden knock on the door. I went downstairs and saw a woman dressed in all black, wearing black sunglasses outside the door. I opened it slightly, and she said hello. She told me she was looking for her lost son, and that he might possibly be playing somewhere in the neighborhood. I was confused and asked her what her son's name was. She insinuated by looking at the bike by her that her son might be playing with my brother in our house. She refused to give me his name though. I called my sister, who approached the door. The woman was very deadpan and gloomy. She just kept asking us if we had seen her son, like she was a robot or something. Finally, we were freaked out enough that we slammed the door in her face. I ran to the window to see what was going on outside after we had shut the door. The lady just kind of stood there for about 5 minutes, staring at the doorway. She didn't move at all. She was just standing there silently. After a while, she slowly walked back to her car and got in. She backed out of our driveway and out into the middle of the street, where she proceeded to sit and idle for quite some time. I remember frantically not understanding what to do during this moment. My sister and I were both panicked. We didn't understand who this woman was. We were unsure if we should call 911 because there were 2 daycares close to where we lived. We sat and watched her car until we saw Mother's car approaching. When our mother's car pulled into the driveway, her car sped off immediately. Our mom didn't believe us when we told her about the weird encounter. I still remember how deadpan and off-putting the woman was. I don't know what that was all about, or what to believe. I've lived in the British countryside my whole life, so dark woodlands and animal noises are nothing new or noteworthy for me. I joined the Scouts when I was young, so many nights were spent playing, tracking, and doing stealth games in the woods. I knew the terrain and the area like the back of my hand. However, the campsite was much larger than I actually knew. When I was younger, I hadn't quite memorized the entire area. There were some beat-down old signs labeling the borders of the camp to the neighboring moorland and murky pond, full of duckweed. This is also where the toilet block was located, a small wooden shack with showers and stuff inside. The light had been broken for as long as I'd ever known, so when camping at this end of the site, we used to tie gas lamps to the washing line to light it up at night. For some reason, when going there alone, I always felt quite strange. When it was loud and busy, I could simply ignore this feeling, but it was much more pronounced on one night. I was just finishing in the bathroom before my friend. I was waiting for him to get done as well. We were about 9 or 10 at this point, so of course neither of us wanted to go alone. There I was, perched on a tree stump waiting for a good 20 minutes. No clue as to what he was doing taking so long in there. The whole time I had this strange feeling, like I wasn't alone. I felt a presence in the trees behind me, which I brushed off as just me being paranoid. Eventually it got too much though. I climbed up a tree nearby to get a better view of the woods. What I saw, I could swear were eyes. However, they weren't that of a cat or a badger or any other kind of animal. I reckon they looked like a human beings. They stared back at me for a good few seconds while I held my breath, trying to melt back into the tree. A loud bang was heard, startling me. I looked back to see my friend was now finished. I quickly looked back to where the eyes had been, only to see nothing there. I grabbed my friend and hurried back to camp. Nothing else strange happened for the rest of that weekend. There's a reason, though, that I mentioned earlier. The grounds were bigger than I had known. I always felt a little uneasy in one particular end of the woods, like I was always being watched there. There was nothing past that toilet block on our crude printout maps. However, there was a much larger tapestry map in the base room, which I had never paid much attention to. After the weird eyes incident, I tended to avoid using that block at all, sometimes even bothering to walk an entire mile to the fancier clean ones near the base. When I was 12, I remember making my way back from the nicer toilet block. I was daydreaming a little, as it would take me a while to get back to camp. I wasn't fully paying attention to my surroundings. Suddenly, I heard a faint crunching of leaves right behind me, too heavy and uncoordinated to be an animal. I whipped around and punched it into gear. Of course, I was very shaken up. While running, I was entirely going off adrenaline. I didn't get a good look at the guy. I only knew that I'd punched and smacked them before I turned to leave, like only a terrified preteen girl could manage. I was stumbling backward to get away from whatever this was, when something pulled me up. I looked back to see my scout leader had pulled me onto his quad bike. He'd been looking for me, since the other girls had been complaining about how long I'd been gone. I felt safe with him. He gave me a lift back to camp, but I still have nightmares about what might have happened to me if he hadn't come exactly when he did. Nothing else happened for a long time since that incident. That was until I was 15 years old. Our gas lamps were running out, so we only had one very dim light left this evening, just enough to light up the area. The nicer toilet block wasn't an option this time, as another group was camping near there. I went to open the door to one of the cubicles when I felt a slight vibration through the wood. The door swung open, and I saw a figure slide out of sight into the night. I kind of turned and walked out, not really sure how to react. Needless to say, I pissed in the woods near camp that night. I live in Denmark at the edge of one of our larger cities. The apartments here are for students only, and a lot of people live close together in this area. You don't really see a lot of people though, except for the student bar after midnight. A friend of mine lives here as well, just on the other side of the parking lot, next to which there's a small playground. This friend and I enjoy watching horror movies, and that's what we were doing on the evening I'm describing. I was at his place, and we had been watching movies all night long. It was getting quite late. I think it was around 3 a.m. or so. I was going to head home and go to bed. I've never been too comfortable in darkness, and watching horror movies doesn't necessarily help. Furthermore, for some reason, there were often issues with some of the lampposts outside in this area, so some areas would be completely unlit. There I was walking home at 3 a.m., and naturally the light was out in the parking lot. It was also out in the playground area. Not a problem though. I was not particularly excited about it, but I was very familiar with these areas. I was about halfway across the lot when I heard a squeaking sound coming from the playground. I turned to examine the origins of this sound, and on the playground on one of the swings is what appeared to be a girl of some sort. I could tell she had long hair, but it was very dark. She was swinging eerily back and forth in the dark alone. I went straight home and called up my friend, whose place I'd just left. I told him about this weird sight. He has a window overlooking the playground and was of course intrigued. He left his computer to have a look outside and returned only seconds later to inform me the playground was completely deserted. I grew up on an island in Alaska and lived on the same property ever since birth. Our house had 2 stories, and the downstairs had a bathroom, furnace room, storage room, entryway, and rec room. One of the walls had some plywood pieces up, so we could feed extension cords through it to our crawl space. We had a C-shaped driveway that you could enter from one side, then park in the carport, then just drive toward the exit. The crawl space consisted of 2 big water tanks. We caught our own rainwater. We also used this area for storage. The space was 10 by 15, but only 3 feet high. You had to lift up a cover to get into the water tanks, and you could only enter the crawl space from the side of the house. It was a 2 by 2 door that we kept a master lock on, but we never actually locked it. Our dog Brewster had an area to the side of the house as well. He had a big fenced area, his own stairway, and porch too. He had a doghouse there. During the summer, we had black bears in our yard most nights, and Brewster would give a quick bark to let them be on their way. We knew his barks well because of this. There were 4 of us in my family. My parents, myself, and my older brother, who's 2 years older than me and has Down syndrome. My brother was in special education at school, and there were other kids who would come into the same room. They had similar disabilities and were able to keep some of their general classes. Some of the kids had discipline problems though, or mental illnesses. My brother was loved by the school kids and everyone that knew him pretty much. One day, a native kid that was about 15 came to our door and wanted to play with Travis. We thought it was odd because Travis had moderate snot and he didn't really like playing with other kids. Instead, he liked watching them play more. Travis really liked watching movies and listening to music. My mom asked the kid what his name was, and he said he was Mark. He knew Travis from junior high the year prior because he would go into Travis's class sometimes for help with his homework. I remember him staring at me a little too much. He didn't seem like someone who was mentally challenged either. My mom let him come in but kept a watchful eye on him. Travis seemed like he didn't even want him to be there. My mom told this Mark that we were having dinner soon and told him it was time for him to go. My mom found out he'd moved into the area where we live, but it was still a little ways away. He had been in and out of foster care for most of his life. His parents were abusive. I think he came over another time too. My mom felt bad for him, and she really felt as if something was off. She felt like he was coming over only because of me. My mom told him that Travis didn't really like having visitors, and he seemed okay with that. He never came over again. My parents went to a church service on Wednesday evenings and would be gone for a couple of hours. I would stay home with Travis during that time. I was around 11 and he was 13. I started helping out in the church nursery when I was 9, and when I turned 11, my best friend and I took a babysitting course, which included CPR and first aid. We would babysit together, and at age 12 we started babysitting on our own. My mom was a homemaker and would always be home except for Wednesday's church service. My parents didn't drink, didn't do drugs, didn't smoke either. I can only even remember them going out a few times. When we were in need of a babysitter, I would leave the downstairs door unlocked for my parents, usually when they were only going to be gone a couple of hours. I was expecting them home in half an hour, and I was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open early. I thought I must have not heard their car pull up or something. Travis was up past his bedtime, so I quietly told him to go to his bedroom and get to bed. I started walking through the kitchen, and I called out for my mom and dad. I heard footsteps stopping. I looked down the stairs, and I could see men's work boots and jeans. This was obviously not my parents. The way the stairs are set up, you could see the bottom half of someone without descending them. I was scared to death. I ran to Travis, who was going down the hall. I grabbed him and dragged him to my parents' bedroom because that was the only room that locked up there. It had a phone too. I don't mean this in a very rude way, but my own kids can be very stubborn. My brother wanted to go to his room. I got him to sit down on the bed though, and was trying to keep him inside while grabbing a gun. I called my neighbor. I could hear whoever this was walking around downstairs. My neighbor answered her phone immediately, and I whispered to her that someone was in our home and that I was really scared. She told me to come out to the front porch and she'd be there. I got the courage to run down to the door. I got outside, and she was already in our driveway. She had a hound dog with her. She let me know she was going to enter the house through downstairs. She disappeared from sight, but came back quickly to tell me the door was locked. She made her way upstairs. When she got to the top, we heard the downstairs door open and the crunching of gravel. The intruder ran off. She let her dog go, and the dog chased the person into the woods. The dog came back 10 minutes later, and our neighbors sat down with us until my parents got home. The police were never called. I think my parents assumed it was a neighbor's boy screwing with me. We live in a safe place where the only thing you have to worry about are bears and the occasional wolf after all. A week after this incident, our dog would bark for 15 minutes after we went to bed, consistently every night. We would look out the windows and see nothing though. We figured it had to be bears because it was springtime. Brewster was probably getting used to them again. A couple of months and the barking was still happening. I had my best friend stay the night. We would always stay downstairs so we could be louder and stay up as late as we liked. She had a brother that was 7 years older, and we'd ask him to bring us booze. All the kids were starting their vices at our age. It was a little after midnight. Her brother never showed up, and Brewster never barked that night either. We were sitting on the stairs braiding each other's hair when we both got the feeling as if someone were looking at us. We looked over, and there was a guy staring into the window. We ran upstairs in a panic. We thought perhaps it was his brother, but he wouldn't have come up to the window to spy on us. The face also seemed a bit darker than his. We had lights on downstairs, and there were no lights by that window outside, so it was hard to tell who it was exactly. We didn't want to wake my parents up just in case it was her brother, so we waited 30 minutes, then went back down to grab our stuff, and went to sleep in my bedroom for the night. The next day we spoke to her brother, and he said it wasn't him. That night, Brewster was back to barking again. 2 more months go by, and I had gone to bed and heard Brewster's bark once more. I looked out my window, and as usual, I didn't see anything. I dozed off again, but woke up to Brewster barking frantically this time. I looked out my window and saw a guy running down our driveway. I thought about waking my parents, but we had a trail on the side of our house that kids used to use to run to the road behind ours. The neighborhood was on the side of a mountain, so all the kids used trails to get straight through to another road instead of using the main roads. I'd never seen someone come out of that part of the driveway though, because the trail was on the south side of the house, along with the crawl space. My room was the only room on the north side. I decided to go back to sleep and was tossing and turning. 15 minutes go by. I smelled smoke. I went into the hall where the smell was a lot stronger. It was starting to get hazy too. Travis's room, which was directly across from mine, was on fire. I screamed, which woke my parents up. Travis didn't want to get out of bed, but thank God for the strength of adrenaline. We got outside, and the flames were pouring out of the crawl space. We got Brewster out of his enclosure, and the neighbors all came out to help us. The firemen arrived rather quickly too, but the fire had destroyed the crawl space and my parents' and Travis's rooms because they were directly over it. The firemen got the fire out thankfully, and no one was physically hurt. That was one of the scariest nights of my life. I always remember the fire chief kneeling down to speak to me after he'd spoken to my parents. He told me, "Hey, Melinda, we believe it was arson." I looked at him with tears streaming down my face and said in anger, "Who is arson?" Everyone started laughing so hard. I was just thinking, how is this funny? This damn arson could have killed our whole family. He then explained to me what arson is. I'm actually still friends with the old fire chief's son. I share that story with him often because his father passed away from cancer when we were teens. His father is the only happy memory I have from that horrific night. The island I grew up on had a city and a village out south. We lived in the area down south, but before the village. We had firemen for the south, north, and the city. We had state troopers for the island, and city cops in the city limits. My mom took my brother and I to our family friend's house, and my dad dealt with the fire officials and the state trooper. After the investigation, my family, neighbors, and firemen pieced together that a person had been living in our crawl space for at least 4 months. We knew he set the house on fire on purpose. He used a box of matches. My mom said the odd thing she noticed was that night she smelled sulfur. We also figured out who did it. It was Mark. His uncle was one of the first firemen who showed up to our house and saw him standing near our driveway, watching. My mom had told him my description of what the person was wearing that I saw fleeing from our house, and that was exactly what Mark was still wearing. Because our crawl space wasn't locked, our insurance company wouldn't have paid for the repairs. Because the space was supposed to be locked, my parents never said anything to the police, and the firemen never said anything either. It took 4 months for our house to be repaired, and it smelled like ozone even years later. What bothered me the most, though, is knowing he had seen me and my friends undressed numerous times while changing in the rec room during tons of sleepovers. He had set up shop right next to the plywood with the holes drilled through. He listened in on all our secrets. I never explained to my friends that he'd seen us and heard us during our sleepovers. I didn't want them to feel sick to their stomachs like I did. I can't sleep if I'm the only adult in the house. I keep the volume on everything very low, and I'm scared to shower. I like to be able to see the front door. I have night terrors to this day. I'm 34 now, and I've been dealing with the anxiety since the fire and panic attacks since I was 18. I was just recently diagnosed with PTSD. When the intruder was in his early 20s, he was caught for burning down a house and put in jail. All of my childhood toys have been stored in the crawl space, along with a lot of our family's sentimental possessions. Ultimately, though, we lost a hell of a lot more than just some possessions that night.